and the segment opens up explaining the very powerful cultural industries and the fact that teenagers are often brought in on Saturdays throughout a given year to discuss what's hot, what's cool, what's hip, and marketers, based on the comments and feedback that they get, will then market their own culture back to them. And I do this at the beginning to sort of foreground the significance of the culture industries. Though this paper will address specific examples of failed moments of a critical gender analysis within both commercial rap and hip-hop culture, and attempt to provide progressive alternatives, not only hip-hop culture, but within the space of the larger culture, I would like to begin by briefly highlighting parallels and similarities with post-racial discourse. The prefix post has taken on considerable baggage in contemporary dialogue. Post-racial, as an example, signifies not just the possibility, but also the fact, according to this perspective, that society has moved to a place where race, as it's understood, has been transcended. Despite overwhelming evidence of social mobility access from education, housing, labor, healthcare, and the rise of incarceration for black and brown bodies, post-racial is being advanced as legitimate. The presidency of Barack Obama has had a Cosby-esque inflection on racial discourse in the United States. Jolly Lewis suggested that the 1980s television landmark, The Cosby Show, allowed white audiences to avoid substantive engagement with issues of race while affirming that hard-working, assimilation-minded African Americans face few real racial challenges in Reagan's 1980s United States. Though The Cosby Show, or any televisual image for that matter, was not expected to resolve centuries-old racial wounds, its projection into homes across both the nation and world acted as a solve and provided evidence, albeit anecdotal, that racial injustice and other forms of social inequality had been fixed. And any failings were not institutional barriers, but reflections of individual inadequacies. Post-racial discourse is an attempt to foreclose meaningful dialogue on the resiliency of the social construct of race in our social, political, economic, and cultural landscapes. Similar to the impact of post-racial discourse, complex narratives of gender are limited within the context of claims that these issues are bigger than hip-hop, or the movement to post-hip-hop, an issue I will return to a bit later in the paper. It's bigger than hip-hop has been a rallying cry and shorthand for the need to address critical societal issues beyond blaming rap music ever since activist rap duo Dead Prez turned the phrase into a hook into a song of the same name. Panelists at rap roundtables, forums, speakers at colleges and universities, to hip-hop heads on the street have all heard or uttered the phrase. Deflections of criticism about the music and related culture have been brushed off simply by statements. These four words have been adequate to state that many of the root causes of the social ills hip-hop reflects are simply that, bigger than hip-hop. While this has been an appropriate response, as it acknowledges that blaming hip-hop is both short-sighted and a form of scapegoating, it has also shortchanged the much-needed public dialogue on the gender divide that is both a part of hip-hop and a continuation of the larger cultural norms. A recent trend among some observers of hip-hop is that hip-hop has strayed so far from its political roots, it no longer has relevancy. While some of these observations may be legitimate, it's bigger than hip-hop is not a substitute for a relevant analysis of gender. Now, prior to discussing some of the missed opportunities or failed moments of critical gender analysis within both commercial rap and hip-hop culture, it's necessary to survey the current state of affairs and operationalize exactly what is meant by the use of hip-hop. One of the things that's common in discourse about hip-hop is everybody saying hip-hop, but meaning very different things. According to Rose, there are two specific groups who take on sexism. Rose maintains those who take on sexism in hip-hop can generally be divided into two broad groups. Those who use hip-hop sexism and other ghetto-inspired imagery as a means to cement and consolidate the perception of black deviance and inferiority and advance socially conservative and anti-feminist agendas. And B, those liberals and progressives who are deeply concerned about the depths of the sexist imagery upon which much of hip-hop relies, but who generally support and appreciate the music and are working on behalf of black people, music, and culture. And I wanted to say this too. Though sexism is the focus here, it should be understood that gender does not equate sexism. One of the privileges of the dominant is not to be named. Therefore, gender means women, race means people of color. In this context, as Richard Dyer notes, the privileged group avoids critical interrogation. McWhorter captures Rosa's sentiment when his writing suggests hip-hop is void of meaningful content and woefully insufficient as anything other than entertaining and diverting. That can be diverting. For others, scholars and media pundits alike, hip-hop has been largely understood as dysfunctional and pathological. As a result of these narrow casts, notions of hip-hop can only be conceptualized as a form of stereotyping, sexism, misogyny, and a site for the production of hypermasculinity. These factors limit the range, depth, and scope of both women and men participating in hip-hop culture. Stereotypes misrepresent, overrepresent, and underrepresent. Stereotypes produce limited and fixed representations of gender in contrast to socially accepted images of how people should behave. Because of this, hip-hop as a culture or pedagogy and possibility as anti-sexist practice is further undermined. The trio of stereotyping, the misrepresentation, overrepresentation, and underrepresentation, leaves women particularly vulnerable as these factors take place in a patriarchal culture where women are already on the fringes of access and power. Perkins asserts stereotyping is a group concept held by one group about another, which results in a simple structure and hides complexity. So I wanted to return to what is hip-hop. Now I know this is one that always encourages debate, heated discussions. So I'm not here to give you the definitive definition of what hip-hop is. I don't think I'd ever pretend to do that. For the sake of conversation, though, it is necessary to highlight a few things. Though hip-hop is comprised of various expressive elements, DJing, graffiti, art, MCing, etc., rap music persists as a dominant form by which most come to terms with hip-hop. Indeed, rap music is loaded with meanings central to the discussion of challenges facing contemporary hip-hop. However, to fully understand hip-hop, a comprehensive understanding of hip-hop functioning as a culture primarily on the outside of the commercial music industry is necessary. Hip-hop is a means of empowerment and expression of oppressed creative intelligence. Hip-hop practitioners, or hip-hoppers or hip-hop heads as they probably call themselves, at least I do, refer to hip-hop as a culture and a way of life. Its immediate precursors and influences include the Black Arts Movement, the Black Power Movement, and the Human Rights Movement, also called the Civil Rights Movement. Though its influences can be traced further back to African oral and performative traditions, these are some of its immediate precursors. KRS in the text Rumination suggests hip-hop is a term that describes the independent collective consciousness of a specific group of inner-city people, ever growing. Hip-hop is not just music and dance, nor is hip-hop a product to be bought and sold. Hip-hop is an independent and unique community and empowering international culture. Kutwana, in his popular first text, The Hip-Hop Generation, notes, the hip-hop generation, the phrase the hip-hop generation, was meant to signify focus on critical generational issues of a group of people. He identifies the years between 1965 and 1984 as the hip-hop generation. And these issues went beyond just rap music. Though the definitions of hip-hop are clear, the rise of the culture industries and conspicuous consumption have blurred more nuanced definitions of hip-hop. Cornel West maintains, one of the most effective strategies of corporate marketers has been to target the youth market with distractive amusement and saturate them with pleasurable sedatives that steer them away from engagement with issues of peace and justice. The incessant media bombardment of images of salacious bodies and mindless violence on TV and in movies, and music convinces many young people that the culture of gratification, a quest for insatiable pleasure, endless titillation, and sexual stimulation is the only way of being human. Commercial rap has been the way some scholars have defined this inevitable unholy union between commodity and culture. This product does not appear in a cultural vacuum, but rather is expressive of the cultural crossings, mixings, and engagement of black youth culture with the values, attitudes, and concerns of the white majority. And I also wanted to note, too, sometimes there's this heated, again, discussion of commercial rap and progressive rap. And sometimes the only difference between the two is a recording contract. So I don't want to pretend to come up here and present this utopia of the underground where everything's perfect, everything's right, that gender and race don't exist. That's certainly not my intention.